Thanks for joining us again for the Kiss and Tell podcast. As always, we have the one and only Dr. Jenny. We're meeting today with Ashley Grubbs, K&T writer, LPC, and future author of working title Blending the Brains. And we're just going to have kind of a nice little chat with Ashley about neurodivergent couples and how that works sexually and how she would help us, myself included, kind of span that little gap that there is in between couples that have different neuro needs. So to kind of quantify that, I have bipolar 2, I am on the spectrum, and I have a husband who is very, very, very forgiving and careful and open-minded. But I think we could all use a little Ashley in our lives because I have had a hard time trying to explain my needs to people. So welcome, Ashley. Thanks for
being here. Happy to be here.
Hi, Ashley. Thank you for being here.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
So excited to have you. So I don't really know where to start because I'm overwhelmed a little bit because I totally identified with everything that you do. So you said you typically do, your favorite thing is neurodivergent couples.
Right.
Can you explain that to me a little bit, what that means?
Sure. So most of the clients that find me or that I actively work with now are a neurodivergent couple. So that could be one of them is neurotypical and the other one is neurodivergent. They could both be neurodivergent, kind of whatever, any kind of blend. But pretty much it means the two of them don't have the same brain type. So one of them might be typical, the other one might have autism or ADHD or, like you mentioned, bipolar, OCD, PTSD, kind of the whole gamut, anything that would make you not considered neurotypical. Mostly the people that are in my office are autistic or ADHDers. So those are the two primary ones that I work with.
So quick question, and I kind of know this because I have ADHD. I know the hyper, so what's the difference between ADD and ADHD?
So now, if you were to get a diagnosis, what is it, like April 26, 2022, you would never get an ADD diagnosis. That one's like not considered working anymore. Yeah, it's like old school. Everything now gets roped into the ADHD, either attentive type, inattentive type, or a combined type. So really the H is kind of dumb, in my opinion. Like it's not going to look like hyperactivity in everyone. So it gets kind of a bad rap. Like not everybody is going to be hyper just because they have ADHD. But yeah, so now ADD wouldn't be a thing. You would get a different subtype.
Wow, I had no idea. Because I am definitely the hyper, so I didn't even question with the ADHD. Yep. So when you meet with partners, how extreme is the difference between their, like, what did you say, their way of thinking, their neurology?
Yeah, just their brain type. Honestly, it depends, because think about how like different the three of us could be. Like we don't all have the same brain type, but we still like are very similar in terms of what we do, what we talk about, what's interesting to us. But if I brought up any given thing, we could disagree hugely on it. That's the same thing with couples. So there's a huge spectrum of how like an ADHD person might communicate or feel or what their needs might be. Same thing with neurotypical or autistic. Like it's just so huge. A lot of it is also going to be determined by like how long did they wait before they thought they would come to therapy, because you know, the longer you wait, the harder and bigger the differences are going to be, of course. And then like how much did they talk about things before they got to seeing me? So the more you communicate, the more open you are. Usually it's just like we have some mismatch in how we talk versus if you've like let your brain type kind of not take over, but if that's been the primary thing and you've never discussed the differences, it's going to be a little bit bigger, a little more heavy duty type work. Same as any couple would be, though.
So that kind of leads me into one of the questions we have here is, if my partner and I feel uncomfortable talking about things sexually, and it's because I don't respond well to criticism and he doesn't respond well, he's not a physical touch person, how does that affect our relationship? And is that something that's come up with people who you meet with?
Yeah. I tell my couples a lot, and in my own relationship, I'm in a neurodivergent relationship myself, that it's like one of you speaks Spanish natively and the other one speaks Russian. And so combined, we need to like speak Mandarin, right? So it's all about finding that middle level. So if you don't like to be criticized, I mean, who does? Totally normal. If someone doesn't like physical touch, also totally normal. So how are we blending how we're communicating, what our wants and needs are, and what we don't like when it comes to sex? So it's about finding how do both of you not do your default and instead create a new default that works well for the both of you. So that's like the really, really big chunk on that.
So what would be your advice then for communicating that?
In that situation, or just like any run-of-the-mill couple that
situation? I feel like sometimes, I mean, both. I feel like sometimes people feel uncomfortable communicating, like I feel uncomfortable with like a hug, or I feel like I need more hugs, or like there's so many different variants on that. And to feel comfortable and safe, like I feel like you do need to express that, but how do you express that to your loved one?
Yeah. So first, it depends.
It doesn't have to be a loved one. It could just be a partner.
Right. Right. Or a variety of partners if you choose to go that way. First, we have to figure out, how do you like to communicate? So I'm super verbal. If my husband was in here, he would say like I would have enough words for the two of us, probably combined. So I would want to say like, I need less physical touch. I'm not a huge physical touch person. I tell my husband that super often. I would be cool with less physical touch than he wants to give me. Versus he is not verbal. He would be much better at like sending me a text message, or like communicating it in another kind of way, right? And so it's figuring out like basically what's our resting state communication, and then prepping our partner for that. So I know right now, guaranteed, if I told Alex, that's my spouse, like, hey, I want to talk about our sex life, he's going to shut down immediately, not going to want to participate in the conversation because I'm verbal, and have a lot of thoughts and feelings, and he usually doesn't understand where I'm coming from just because our brains aren't the same. And so he's like not going to be present in that conversation at all. He'll try, but he's going to get flooded really easy and shut down. And so when it's someone who's more verbal and feels comfortable expressing their needs, I advocate to like set a time. So I might tell him like, hey, whenever you feel ready, I want to talk about sex. Like I want to talk about our sex life. That way he gets to pick. So he feels safe. He feels comfortable. You know, it's more on his terms. He's prepped himself and like gone through his own emotional work to get there. Versus he'll do the same for me. So he might like send a text message or like write a sticky note or whatever, like, hey, tonight, can we talk about X, Y, and Z? Because I am verbal, I can do it on cue, but if he needs time, I need him to tell me what that time is going to be. You know, so finding a way to get both people prepped and ready to have that conversation about needs, and then saying their need in a way that's going to work for their partner.
How much work does that take, Dr. Jenny? Because you have met with a countless number of couples and individuals. So just to be able to say like, hey, I need 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. And I had this conversation with you, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, about a specific show on PBS. And they teach emotional like health. And it was something like, you know, stop, I need space. And, you know, kind of defining your boundaries. And that is not something that most people, at least, you know, from my experience, and I've met a gambit of people, feel comfortable with. So how would you address that both with people that you've met with and with people who are on extreme opposites. So either super communicative and not. Dr. Jen.
Oh, I wasn't sure if you were talking to me or Ashley. I apologize. One way I would address it is to take it one step at a time. Instead of trying to do it all at once, you break it into pieces, almost like a puzzle, and just address what you can talk about in that moment. Instead of trying to solve it in one conversation, just break it down and say, okay, what can we talk about for the next 5 to 10 minutes? And I'll have your full attention. And get permission from your partners to have that conversation. Because if you just start talking, like I'm doing now, I'm kind of blah, 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 you might lose them because they're not ready. So, Ashley said, when are you ready? When would you wouldn't give them the power so they're comfortable about having the conversation.
Like a summit.
Mm-hmm. And also give yourself permission to make mistakes. It's not, there is no end all be all. It's you're learning as you go. And
So,
what applies today may not apply tomorrow. And that's okay too.
So Ashley, same question. If someone's like, we operate, obviously your specialty is neurodivergency, but like if I want to address this right now because that's my personality, I'm very like, let's figure it out. And someone is like, hey, I need to take time. I need space. I need 2 days or 3 days. How would you coach a couple? Because I know that's something that you have really been passionate about. How would you coach a couple to kind of get through that? Because it's difficult to be in a couple to begin with. I mean, after the first year, let alone, when you really, a year and a half, I always say, is like the end of the super honeymoon phase. Not that you have to move in with each other, not that you have to do anything, but there's this like intimacy where it's like, that's when we kind of start eating junk food. Not start eating, but that's when we abandon the notion that we eat broccoli every day.
Yeah.
So how do you coach a couple that's been like struggling with this the whole time, but now it's kind of come to a point where it's like, we need to figure out what we're doing here?
Yeah. You do it with a lot of like safety in mind, especially for my neurodivergent clients. They've been taught, not necessarily by their partner, but maybe reinforced by their partner, masking. And so it's very, very common for them to say, here's what I think you want me to say. So I'm going to say that and do that thing, even though like maybe that's not the thing I actually want to do. So that's the first part, right? Is like being able to teach people how to drop the mask and present authentically and have a real conversation with their partner is like step one. And that's not even just specific to sex, just in general, feeling like you're allowed to have your own wants, needs, thoughts, like who cares what society says is part one. Then some distress tolerance. So I'm like the first person you mentioned. If I have something I want to do it like right now in this minute, if it's gone from my brain, it'll never come back. Like immediacy is really big. And my partner is not at all like that. He could sit for like 2 weeks and like have this perfectly formed, beautiful pearl of a sentence by the time he says it to me because he's sat and reflected on it so long. So for the people who run like me, like we have to work on distress tolerance. Like if we're forcing our partner to speed up and do it on our own terms, at some point that's going to backfire in your face. Like they're either doing lip service or your needs aren't actually going to be met, like just a gigantic hot mess. So distress tolerance for the people like me. And then for people who are closer to my partner, we add a timeline. So I tell my clients, like, if you're the one, I teach them to do a code word. So if you get overwhelmed, like you can use your code word And then whoever used the code word,
That's our
bring-
code word. That's
Yeah.
so funny you said that.
But you have to bring it up within 24 hours. You can't like permanently table the conversation. It has to be circled to. So if I'm saying like, I want to talk about more physical touch or less physical touch, and Alex isn't ready to go there, he's got 24 hours to sit on it, and then he has to address that I said it. So that doesn't mean, like Dr. Jenny was saying, we don't have to finish the conversation in that 24 hours, but like we at least have to start putting the pieces together, because my distress tolerance is only going to go so long, and he could avoid forever if
Because
he
I'm
needed
respecting your timeline, but you also have to respect mine.
Right,
So
exactly.
I want immediate, you want space. Let's meet in the middle.
Right. So it's making that Mandarin, right? Learning Mandarin when it
Yeah.
comes to like the time frame on things. Yeah, goes both ways. Both people have to do the work.
Mhm. I think that's one of the biggest problems that I see as a couples therapist, is that both people don't realize they both have to change. It's never one-sided.
Change?
Yeah.
No, that's all. That's all the other person.
But even if they only have to do it 10%, they still have to do that 10%.
Too many. I'll do
Yeah.
2%
So,
tops.
Better than zero. My
No,
clients are
I'm
really
sarcastic. I agree, Dr. Jenny.
mhm.
How many people do you think are willing to change, let's say even 10%?
by the time they get to me, probably 100% of mine, because they know.
Because they're in
The
kind of
time you're finding the neurodivergent piece, you've already discovered, like that's already at play, and it's very quick what you can and can't change. Like I can't ask my partner to be less autistic than he is, right? I can't ask him to want less physical touch from me when I know that's how his brain gets reassurance. Like that's an immovable force in our relationship. So at some point, I'm going to say, if this annoys me, like that's on me. I'm the one who has to figure out what to do here. So I could be biased. I love my clients. I'm really lucky to do
But
the
that's
work.
where you come in. That's where we need the Ashley Grubbs.
Yeah. Getting to that, the desire to do 10% is super rough. You know, everyone thinks their way is right.
The desire to do any percent is the starting place. And that's where we all need a little Ashley Grubbs in our life to be like, okay, well, let's span, because I'm physical touch. I need like pressure. But the funny thing is, I have always been very standoffish. Like, I don't hug. Like, don't hug me. But when I'm like around, like with my husband, I'm like, I just want you. And it's the first time ever that I've dated someone, obviously married someone. And even like my sister, like my family members will be like, hugs. And I'm like, my sister, I like to scoop her up because she's just my favorite. But with other people, I'm like, okay, hug. But for some, even cuddle, like holding hands, like that's just something that's new to my relationship with my husband. So finding that kind of balance between now my craving for that physical touch and his more practical approach to things has been interesting. So how do people find you to kind of span the bridge that relationships like mine and like a million other people have?
So a lot of it is word of mouth. Neurodivergent people tend to know other neurodivergent people, so that's the big one. But you could also look me up on my website, which is www.blueharbortherapy.com.
Mm-hmm.
Or for people, couples specifically, who live in a state I'm not licensed in. So I'm only licensed in Texas, Colorado, Maryland, and Virginia. So if you're not in those, yeah, you've moved a lot. You know, military life, what can you do? You're going to bounce around a little bit. But there's my coaching one, which is seaportcoaching.com. So that's any client not in those states.
You're saying only, like it's not. That's a lot of states to be.
50, you know, 4 is pretty small compared to 50. Lots of couples and those other 46.
So I have one more question for Dr. Jenny, and then we'll kick it to you as well. Have you, Dr. Jenny, ever been not involved, I shouldn't say that. Have you ever been involved as a therapist with a polyamorous couple?
No.
Because I know, Ashley, that's something that you...
I had one come in, the one half come in, but they didn't both come in. So, no.
But Ashley, I know that's something that you are kind of finding a niche in, right?
Probably like 45% of my clients right now are maybe not poly, but not monogamous. So open in some capacity, whatever that might look like for them. So like a good chunk of the people I see are, yeah.
So what's the difference between open relationship and being polyamorous?
So poly people, it's all agreed upon. Maybe not both of them could be poly, but it's going to be like fully formed relationships. So like two partners, not two husbands, but like two intimate partners. You might call them both your girlfriend, your boyfriend, whatever. Like there's a little bit more commitment and love towards it. Versus like monogamish is someone who like maybe we have a threesome now and then. Like we like to check out people at the bar, like that kind of thing. Or someone where like you're allowed to just have one night stands with people. So huge variety when it comes to opening your relationship. You can open it and like not at all even consider being poly. So all of the things in between that are the things I do pretty often.
How do you feel about that? How people handle it? Do you think people handle it? Do you think the majority that do the lifestyle, I'm probably using the wrong term, but do you think they're comfortable with it? Or do you think they're doing it because it's trending?
I think it depends on the couple, and how much they've communicated it. My neurodivergent ones, honestly, it's pretty seamless for them. They have like a lot less boundaries, right? Neurodivergent brains are just not as like pigeonholed into what a relationship is, what it means to be a man or a woman or whatever. Like it's a lot looser. So they tend to adjust pretty well. Having said, I still see a lot of people who opened it up like with no rules or no boundaries and just like jumped in and went for it. And then now they're like, what do I do that like I like this person I had the threesome with more than I like my partner? Like those things never go well. But I will say just based on the people I see, like some people do really successful. It's really meaningful. The more love you have to give is never a bad thing. You just want to make sure it's consensual across all parties.
Right. Yeah, people usually miss that part.
Yeah.
Yeah. They like the fun part.
Yeah, and don't think like fun sometimes has ramifications. Like sometimes too much fun is bad. Always
too
going
much
to
candy will give you cavities.
Yeah, exactly. And those cavities can be permanent in this case. Like can be very, very damaging.
I still have Novocaine damage from this morning, so.
So what caused you to get into sexology?
I knew always. Yeah, I knew always this is what I wanted to do. I'm from Texas, and the South is very Southern. There's not a lot of people talking about sex openly. I had pretty good role models personally. My parents are pretty cool. My dad as much as he can be, considering I'm his daughter. But no one else I knew or like worked with or interacted with, nobody else ever talked about sex. So I knew when I was like 16 or 17 that this was the very specific thing I wanted to do. It's just always been the thing. I would say I'm maybe not great as a therapist in a lot of other things. Like it's just not my style to do everything. Like sex is the big thing for me. So I got really lucky to know early on and had a good support system. Had a really good sex therapy teacher in grad school who helped guide. So just always knew.
That's fantastic. What's your, if you don't mind me asking, your sex therapy teacher?
So I had in grad school, I had someone who's no longer practicing or alive, so I won't name him because his family doesn't always like that attention. But then in my PhD program, Joe Court is my supervisor, and so he really helped hone in. He was a big push for like, stop doing all this other stuff and only do neurodivergent stuff, because I was like not necessarily advertising that was my big thing. And he was like, you're an idiot, only do this. So he helped push that direction too. So I've just been really lucky across the board in that.
Awesome. So you've had a lot of support.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've had a lot of, pushback too, but it's good to have that kind of, I mean, it's not just in general, sex, especially as a female, talking about it is not,
right.
Even now, which is crazy.
Yeah,
it's not still super open. But to be someone who's like, I'm going to help people and talk about sex with them. And I think that's the best thing about Kiss and Tell, and that Dr. Jenny kind of brought to light, was like, we just want to have a platform where people can just, everyone thinks about it. Let's talk about it, because a lot of times people don't. And people don't ask the questions, which is why I'm here. Steph at Kiss and Tell Magazine. And, send me your questions. I've had a couple for Dr. Jenny and a couple. Oh, wait, I still have one more. How do you know if your partner, and we're running up on time here, but how do you know if your partner is like, if they say, okay, let's use physical touch because we talked about it earlier. If they say, okay, I need physical touch, and you don't want to give that, how do you draw that line if you want to kind of sever that relationship then? Like
because they don't want physical touch?
Yeah, or I don't like physical, like whatever it is. If there's something that your partner, who is either, neurodivergent, or just you guys don't see eye to eye on things, how do you draw that line? Because it can't always be, let's communicate and work it out, right? And just sometimes you need to be like, nice to meet you.
Yeah. So we got to find our non-negotiables, right? So if that's physical touch and you're totally unwilling to do it, like, the brain doesn't matter, right? Like, it doesn't matter how you think or how you process information. If one's a yes and the other's a no, great. We talked about it. We discovered it. Like, we know that we're not going to agree. Hopefully you enjoyed the time you did have together. So just kind of saying, like, this can't be something that's meaningful for both. Both of us are going to be stressed to continue, like, forcing the need to either go away or forcing to need it. So, what are all our alternative options? If it's breaking up, it's breaking up. But a sex need is just as valid as any other kind of need.
It's more important though.
Well, because I mean, whether it's a sex need or a sex, I mean, I guess everyone experiences sex differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm obviously not a sex therapist, but I think everyone experiences sex and intimacy differently. I don't know, Dr. Jenny, you could probably shed more light on that than I can, obviously, but
I mean, Ashley and I could do a whole show just on that, just on all the experiences that people can do with sex. I mean, it's so huge, and I think that part of the problem is people don't realize how big it is, how many options they have. I mean, they can define it differently on a daily basis, and it's still sex, but it's up to them to define it, to understand it. I mean, and to understand that what is it to them? It's not just defining it as a couple, but defining it for yourself. What is it? What do you want it to be? What do you want it to look like? What do you want it to feel like? And most people don't take that time to learn, which is part of the reason they have problems. So, or they don't take the time to learn how to communicate it.
Or to ask. A lot of times, just in general, just in like, hey, what kind of pizza do you want? People don't ask. They're like, hey, we're getting a, pineapple pizza, to which some people will be like, yes. And other people will be like, No, what do you mean?
Mhm.
But I guess I
And
want to
it
hear
can
it.
change.
'Cause
You know,
I'm
you might
hungry.
not want the same thing 5 years from now that you liked now, and so maybe in 5 years from now, your partner is no longer sexually compatible. It doesn't mean the 5 years you had, they weren't, you know? Like, I think people forget things kind of ebb and flow as you grow as a person. Your sex life, your sex needs, they ebb and flow too.
And just even your body,
Yeah.
like the way you enjoy sex acts changes because your body changes.
Mhm.
You know, your pleasure points and erogenous zones kind of move or enhance or, you know, kind of make those changes that you're not always even cognitive of until you're like, whoa, okay. Like, found that one. That's good. What was that?
Yeah.
Where'd that come from?
Yeah, you're right. But I think ideally, in an ideal world, if you will, is stop looking for the answer. There's one answer, and they think once they have it, everything else will take care of itself.
Right.
And that's not the case. There is no perfect answer. There is something that you want that you know you always feel good when it happens. However, that changes, as what Steph says, it's the ebb and flow. Now, what do you think, Ashley? I know you have a lot more comments than what I said.
Yeah, I think that's the big piece is, are we communicating about things? Because sometimes it's like you'll have a baby and so your body's going to feel different after something like that. Or, you know, like you'll have menopause or you'll have surgery. Like my dad had prostate cancer and had to have surgery. And so that's going, you know, like things are going to impact and you can't always see those things coming. Right. And so I think it's about constantly checking in with yourself and figuring out what feels good to me. And also, do I want you to be the one to meet the need? You know, because you can like you said, you can be looking for an answer, quote unquote, but sometimes it's not your partner. You want to give you that answer anyway, you know? And so like being really mindful of all of the pieces and being open to the experience or knowing for sure you're not open to the experience and planning accordingly based on that. It's not just like, here's what I liked yesterday, so this is what I'm always going to like with you forever until I die. You know, like that's unreasonable.
But, well,
What's
on
your
that
favorite
note,
dish?
that's a good ending note. So, thank you, Ashley, for
Thank
joining
you,
us.
Ashley.
And
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And our next live podcast is May 3rd, and that will be a Q&A talk show. So send in your questions, and we'll answer live. And we'll also talk about current topics, whatever they may be at the time. And that's May 3rd at 7 p.m. Eastern.
Yep. And you can always send all your questions. You know, I'm not afraid to ask them at steph@kissandtellmagazine.com and send me all your dirty laundry because I am more than willing to air it and have no shame just hanging it out there.
And thank you, everybody, for watching. And we'll see you next week, actually.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Thanks, Dr. Jenny.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you, Ashley.
Bye.
Bye.